Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I have to tell you, I had the best weekend in such a long time. I love seeing live music, but I don't do it nearly as much as I should. So when my buddy Dan called me up and was like, hey, I got an extra ticket to the Murder City Devil show, I was like, I'm in. But to tell you the truth, while I know of the band, and I'm sure I've heard some of their music, I was really going because Dan is such a great friend. He was my first friend in Seattle. We live together, and I don't get to spend nearly enough time with him. So I let Dan know that I didn't know the music, and he said, think the Misfits with an organ. So I did what I always do. I put in time for the research, aka for 5 days I listened to the Murder City Devils when I rode my Peloton bike and when I walked my dog. And man, they are awesome. It's almost funny to me that I could like a band so much and really didn't know that much about them until the week I saw them live. So first, I met up with Dan and a few other rad dudes, one of which I'm going to try to get on the podcast in the near future, and we had a bunch of beers as dry January was over. And then we went and saw the early show. It was awesome. So awesome that after, I had quite a few in me, and I decided that I was going to try to get into the sold-out late show. The rest of the crew wanted to join me, but I think they were convinced that I would never make it in, because they told us at the box office and the bouncer said that there was no chance that we were going to get in because it was completely sold out. So we went to another bar, had some more beers, and I told those guys, hey, I'm going to try to get in. If I don't come back in 20 minutes, that means I'm in the show and I'll see you later. But sure as shit, I came back and I sat down and had some beers, and I let those guys know that I met a bouncer, and she told me that there was no chance I was getting in, but I should still come and check a few minutes before the show started. So we had some more beers, I left the bar again, stumbled to the bouncer who told me I had no chance of getting in a few different times, and she was like, I found you a ticket. The dude who had the extra ticket, well, he wanted nothing from me, but I insisted that I give him his $40 back. But what I found out later was that I gave him a $20 bill and a $1 bill because I had another 20 in my pocket. So sorry, dude, and thank you for the ticket. I didn't mean to screw you over with that $20, but you didn't want my money anyway, so it didn't really matter. The second show was awesome too. And when it was time to go home, I was a wreck, and I wasn't going to pay for a $50 Uber ride. I considered walking home for some reason, but then I offered a random Uber driver $30 to take me home. He was like, yeah, man, I'll do it. I need gas, and this is the perfect way to fill up my car. So as sketchy as that move was, I found a safe ride home, and it all worked out. Needless to say, I'm going to start seeing more live music. Being entertained is so much fun. And speaking of being entertained, this week I'm putting Greg Stump back on the podcast as he has a weekly showing of his iconic movies in Aspen that he's going to tell us all about. The podcast is going to be all about him telling us stories from the Maltese Flamingo, Groove Requiem in the Key of Ski, Blizzard of Aahhh, and Legend of Aahhh. Before we get into it, and sticking with the entertainment theme, I'm going to do something I've never done before. Amy Engebretson, a good friend of mine and Powell Movement alum, is putting out a new movie with TGR next week. And nobody really puts out mid-season releases, and Amy asked if I could help her promote the movie, and I was like, you bet I can. So here's what Amy has to say about her project that'll be out next week.
The movie is called The Hypocrite, and I'm releasing it mid-season because it's pretty different than most ski films we're used to. It's actually a climate documentary. And I made the film with Protect Our Winters. I got a grant from them to start the film. And then Teton Gravity Research is the production house behind the film. And it's a crazy film. It basically just totally goes behind the curtain and tries to address the elephant in the room that I think a lot of people think about but don't talk about, of athletes like myself advocating for climate, working with POW, but still burning a lot of fossil fuels in doing what we do and pursuing our dreams. And it just aims to bring that issue to light, talk about it, talk about why we talk about individual carbon footprints, if they matter, where there's actual potential for change. And really my hope with the film, and my hope for everyone that goes and watches it, is that we can all find some unity in our community to kind of help bring action to this issue kind of together, rather than kind of pointing fingers at each other and tearing each other down, and also address like our own perceived hypocrisy and the inherent imperfection of this whole situation. So it's kind of a crazy film. And it was crazy to make. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the scariest thing I've ever done releasing it. So I appreciate you letting me promote it. And I hope you all listening go watch it. It's called The Hypocrite. It'll be on TGR's YouTube.
Cool. And when's it come out?
It comes out February 21st.
And what do you say to all those people that are like, it's dumping snow and it's super cold in this one part of the world where there is no global warming?
Climate's not weather. And I think that at this point, anybody can look around and just see how weird our whole planet and our whole winter system has gotten. That's climate in action. That's causing the extreme weather. That's causing the extreme droughts. If you're someone who is like, I don't watch climate documentaries, this is for you. That's exactly who I made this film for.
Thanks, Amy. And there are so many people who have a problem with athletes who are raising awareness about climate change, but also have a huge carbon footprint. This will be an interesting look into the lives of one of those athletes, and I'm stoked that Amy's brave enough to put herself out there. That's enough promoting. At this point, I want to ask you to tell your friends about the show, share my social posts, which really none of you do, and it's so easy. These things really do help the show grow, so please help me out and do that. Finally, I only work with the best brands in snow and beyond, and they are Outdoor Research, Elon Skis, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Best Day Brewing. Now, let's chat with Greg Stump. We discussed that I spend way too much time in the hospital lately, but I'm not a patient. But in late 2023, I heard you were in the hospital, and like so many other people, I was worried about you. What was going on, if you're comfortable about talking about it, and are you better?
Yes, I'm better. It's diverticulitis, right? I was diagnosed with it maybe 4 years ago. And, you just have to be careful what you eat and what you consume. So anyway, I had a flare up and it started bleeding. So getting ambulance rides all over the place. But then the bleeding stopped and I went on antibiotics. And I just have to be careful about what I eat and consume.
Does it affect drinking or anything like that? Or are they tell you not to do that? Or are you still able to live the life of Stump?
What, drinking alcohol?
Yeah.
No, it's best not to do it. The life of Stump. That's funny, Mike. Yeah, no, I mean, like anything. Alcohol's not good for anything except making you happy and then hungover.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm fine. And like I said, I was diagnosed 4 years ago, but this was a particularly bad flare up because one of them diverticulitis started bleeding. So that's never good. They gave me like 2 liters of fresh blood. But yeah, no, I'm actually fine now. And it was really nothing. I mean, I've had an interesting year. I had ankle replacement surgery in March.
And you hadn't been skiing for a long time because your ankle was constantly bothering you because like you're an old world freestyle champion and you've done a ton of damage to your body. With the ankle replacement surgery, are you better? Can you ski again?
Yeah, well, I could have skied before because, once you get your foot in a ski boot, it's like you're in a cast.
True.
For me, it was walking to whatever lodge or I couldn't walk without an ACO brace. An ACO brace is one of those, it's basically this big piece of plastic that's in your shoe and then goes up the back of your calf.
Yep.
You have to strap it because I had no ankle. They couldn't even have done a fusion. I mean, they basically just went in there and took out all the broken pieces and threw them in the incinerator, and it doesn't hurt, and I can walk perfectly now without a limb.
That's crazy.
It is, but when you think about it, I started competing when I was 8 years old. So I did all the competition stuff, and then did like 2 years of college, and then was dreaming of making a ski movie. So the next thing I know, I'm back on skis and working in ski boots and freezing and carrying around, 75 pounds on my back. So I really wasn't into skiing. I was like not into being cold. Plus I'd lived in Hawaii for about 5 years. I just wasn't into it. But now with the new ankle, and I've got new Stokely Storm Riders, and Jackson Hogan fit me in these atomic boots. So I've got all my stuff here and I'm going to go skiing. But I'm really excited about going cross country skiing because they have really nice trails here. And I don't know, it's a little more aerobic.
Well, we are not here to talk about aerobic exercise. We are here to talk about what you're up to this month in Aspen. And will you give me an overview of what these Radical Wednesdays are all about? Because I know you just had your first one 2 nights ago, and I heard it was a massive success. So could you tell us what's it all about and then talk about how well Wednesday went, the first one?
Every Wednesday we do, I didn't come up with the name Radical Wednesdays because I'm the least radical person you'll ever meet.
If it was you, it would be Extreme Wednesdays, I feel like. That's the name you come up with.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if it was me, it would be like Lazy Wednesdays or Sleepy Wednesdays. But we're doing, every Wednesday we do a different movie. And we started out with Maltese Flamingo, which I was a little, worried because I had a feeling that people would like it because it's so green and innocent. And that's exactly what they did like. But we were sold out, and it was interesting. It was a pretty much older crowd of people that knew Maltese Flamingo from their youth. And It was a blast, and people were laughing the whole way through because it's a pretty funny movie, really.
It's out there a little bit too, like the sleeping bag stuff and some of the skits that are in it.
We had people showing up at the after party in sleeping bags, like wearing sleeping bags, because that's a pretty funny skit.
So it was kind of like a Rocky Horror Picture Show, but with your spin on the movie?
The after party or the actual movie?
The atmosphere of the movie and everything, did it feel like a Rocky Horror Picture Show type deal?
It really was, and it was packed. There was standing room only. We had really cool music playing before people came into the theater. The ISIS Theater, and that's what we're doing it for. I mean, I'm doing it for hoping to entertain people and show these vintage movies. But it's also the whole thing's a fundraiser for the continuing restoration of the ISIS Theater, which is this really cool old movie theater in downtown Aspen, and it's partially renovated, but it definitely needs a lot more work. But it's owned by Aspen Film. They're the people I'm working with here.
It's crazy that Aspen Film couldn't raise the money themselves without getting Greg Stump in there, because I see what you're doing is something really, really cool, but the money in Aspen is so ridiculous, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in film and Hollywood that come to Aspen that would want to help renovate an incredible theater like that, but that's just me.
A rich donor bought the theater for them.
So they own it now.
They own the theater. And, the small amount of money I'm making for them, it was just the way it would all work, because we get the theater. They have a really great support team at Aspen Film. It's Susan Rubel and Aaron McCoy, and it's just a really, really slick team. I'll mention that it's all women, which is why it runs so efficiently. So it just was, I hate the term, but, win-win. But it was a win-win-win-win-win-win-win.
Okay. And what we're doing with this podcast is something that I usually don't do. We're promoting this whole thing that you're doing, but really we're going to talk about the stories behind 4 of your incredible movies and the 4 movies that you're showing in Aspen. And while you've already shown the Maltese Flamingo, we'll talk about that for a little bit. And Maltese Flamingo, like all of your movies, when you think about the titles you used, it always plays off a familiar Hollywood production, or most of the time it did. Did you ever get in trouble for those names, or was it not a big deal in the early 80s?
No, surprisingly, I did. Well, what are they going to say? Maltese Flamingo. It's like, that's not Maltese Falcon. It's Maltese Flamingo. I mean, the closest to really stealing a title was Blizzard of Aahhh.
But Blizzard was different because you weren't stealing from Wizard of Oz by any means, right?
No, I was stealing from Ozzy Osbourne. He made a record called The Blizzard of Aahhh, O-Z-Z, with 2 Zs. And I saw that title of his record because I was a DJ at the time. I thought, wow, that's a great name for a ski movie. Blizzard, snowy, you white out, Blizzard, Oz. And then I thought, well, what about the Blizzard of Ah? And I spell it grammatically incorrect on purpose because, Oz can't be plural. But I wanted it to be plural because it was a movie with multiple Ah.
Did Ozzy or anybody ever pick up on that?
No, I never heard from Ozzy. I'd like to, because, War Pigs is one of my favorite songs.
And that whole album was an incredible album, but we're going to go to Maltese Flamingo, and when I think about that movie, you had I think, some other movies first, or maybe not, but I think you had, was Droids before that?
Yeah, there was Droids, and then Time Waits for Snowman.
Okay.
Which was the first one, was something I would dare to show. But Maltese was a lot of first. It was the first movie that we shot entirely on film, 16 millimeter film. It was also the first movie that we wrote a lot of the music, wrote and produced. Pretty much 80% of the movie is all original music that we wrote and recorded in Portland, Maine with a bunch of my friends. And then the other tracks were from ZTT Records in London.
And this is the first time you filmed with Plake, I think. Or this is the first movie
Yes.
that he was really featured with. How did you end up meeting Glen?
Because he stalked us. I didn't intend on Glen being in the movie, but he just kept showing up every place that we were at. And I'm like, how does this guy know where we're going? Because only 2 people knew where we were going, me and my business partner, Carl Labby. And Glen just kept showing up everywhere. Snowbird, Plake would show up. Squaw, Plake would show up. Everywhere. He just kept showing up. And I would only find out about a year later that Carl was telling Glen where we were so that he would show up, because Carl had the business sense to know that Glen was going to be a big star. And I was just scared of Glen because he was, at that point, a liability for me, because I was, goody 2-shoes. I didn't party, or I was very serious about getting the movies done because you had to be. This is a ton of work. But Glen kept showing up, and I didn't want him around because he was at that point, he was using drugs and drinking fairly heavily. He was in his full-on punk rock state of mind and state of existence. I mean, he'd wake up underneath the stage at shows.
You can kind of paint a picture of his behavior back then by just saying what happened at the movie premiere, I think in Maine, when he was staying at your house. Can you tell that story?
Oh, yeah. I just had bought this brand new condo, right? And I was so proud. I finally had bought a place to live. And I was just really excited. I had this white Berber carpeting, and Glenn was wearing these orange Bad Boy Club pants, right? And he passed out on my carpet, my white Berber carpet, and pissed himself. And so it left this full crotch, orange crotch stain. Like you could see the zipper and everything. It was just really gross on my carpet, on my brand new carpet. And then he also puked out of the side of my car. You know, he just was a mess.
And while he's sober now, it's almost funny because Glenn's sober now, but back then you were the sober guy, or maybe you drank a little bit or whatever, but you didn't do too much of anything. And Glenn was the party guy. And then when did you guys almost trade places? Because he's like 30 years sober, but in my dealings with you, I know we've drank a few beers together and I know you like to have a good time. When did you kind of find the dark side?
Well, I think it's the light side. Well, Glenn always jokes that we did this, the classic role reversal thing. But I did, because when I was first making the movie, there was no time, or I didn't have the energy to be partying. You know, I was super serious and I wanted to get the film done. And, and at that point, it's just Bruce Benedict and I shooting. So we're doing everything. And, I don't have a camera assistant. So I didn't have time to party. I really didn't start partying until I stopped making movies and I'd moved to Whistler, because Whistler, it was just impossible not to. And plus, I'm living with Ace, and she's a go-go dancer, so I'm, in Tommy Africa's all the time. I made Groove, but then after Groove, I didn't make a film for 3 or 4 years. I just lived in Whistler and partied and skied every day, or snowboarded. Once I got on a snowboard at Whistler, I was just like, wow, this is way better, because Whistler's pretty low altitude, so the snow is pretty gunky. But not on a snowboard, it was great. And then I didn't start skiing again until Fat Skis came out. Because it was like, all of a sudden you could ski like you were on a snowboard at Whistler. As you know, Whistler's, 3 different climate zones.
Sure.
Yeah, so, powder at the top, okay in the middle, and pissing rain at the bottom.
Well, I'm going in 2 weeks, and it sounds like it's pissing rain all over the place there, so I'm not that excited, but I am excited.
No, it looks dismal. They canceled a bunch of races. They couldn't even hold, like, the over-the-hill downhill because it's so rainy and hot and gunky.
Well, that's Whistler, but I'm going to go to my last question about Plake. You guys split up after License to Thrill, and he was such a big star, and I'm sure you got a lot of people coming to the movie to see what Plake was going to do. I mean, you had other guys as well, but you were a great exposure vehicle for him. He was a great exposure vehicle for you and just getting people to come to the movie. Why the breakup?
It was actually Dr. Strangelove.
Oh, okay.
There was a lot of reasons. The biggest was that I was sponsored by Solomon, and Glenn had told not just me, but Bernard Solomon, that, he's going to ski on the product. And then he got a big fat, offer from, I think, Reichle Tyrolia, and he signed a deal with them. So he got a whole ton of money to be on Reichle Tyrolia, but I couldn't film him. I could. You watch Dr. Strangelove. I mean, that movie's screwed up for a lot of reasons. One of them is that Glenn, I can't show his feet because he's in the wrong product.
Right.
So, that's problematic, making a ski movie with a guy in the wrong ski boots and bindings. And then there was no snow in Europe again for the second year. That's why we didn't go back to Europe after Blizzard, because there was no snow. Fortunately, we had good snow in Whistler and we had good weather for License to Thrill. But by Strangelove, there's no snow in Europe, and now there's no snow in North America. So I got no snow. My star skier's on the wrong product. And, that was a pretty big betrayal, because he, not just me, but Bernard Solomon. I mean, Bernard Solomon of Solomon.
Right.
That he's going to ski on the product. So anyway, I thought that was a big, screw you betrayal, but he made a lot of money. And so I was like, screw this guy. I'm not going to deal with him. And plus, at that point, now I'm living at Whistler, and I finally got a girlfriend and free season passes for both mountains. I had bought a condo up there with what little money I had. I bought a condo in Whistler for $80,000. Can you believe that?
That's crazy. And it's probably worth, if you still had it, it would be worth millions.
No, I lost it in my common law divorce.
Oh, man.
It's worth $1.1 million now.
Oh, jeez. Well, again, we're going to go back to Maltese Flamingo, and that one is supposedly Hunter S. Thompson's favorite ski movie of all time. But when you think of Hunter S. Thompson, the movie has that kind of spirit. Did you know the man, and what was your interactions with him?
No, I didn't find out that it was his favorite movie for years. And it was really fun doing this show here because we heavily promoted it as Hunter Thompson's favorite ski movie. And I had my Gonzo shirt, and the main sponsor, Fat City Gallery, who's our main sponsor of this whole series, sells Ralph Steadman art and Hunter Thompson books. And it's an art gallery here in Aspen run by this guy, DJ, who did know Hunter, but they're our main sponsor. So it really was cool that all these things came together because about 16 years ago, somebody came up to me in Aspen. I was at the Bentley in the afternoon, shocker, sitting at the bar. And this guy comes up to me and goes, Hunter Thompson wants to meet you. And in my mind, I'm looking at him going, screw you. That's a really rude thing you say. I mean, he didn't have any idea how much I was influencing it. I wasn't just reading Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I was reading Curse of Lono and Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, his coverage of Richard Milhous Nixon's 1972 campaign. And Hunter hated Nixon. Like in the gallery features a bunch of Hunter Thompson's shotgun art, which is these paintings and things that he just shot with paintballs and deer shot and whatever guns he wanted. But he's got this thing of Nixon, and there's just gun holes through Nixon's head, and there's blood splattered all over in the gallery. So anyway, this guy comes up to me and says, Hunter Thompson wants to meet you. And I'm just like, screw you. And I wanted to say, oh, yeah, does Paul McCartney want me to come over too? Or, I didn't believe him. And I said, tell you what, you tell Hunter I say hi and blah, blah, blah. About 5 years later, my brother, who is a private-only ski instructor at Aspen, calls me and goes, one of my clients, Jerry Goldstein, actually, who's an attorney, used to represent Hunter. And he told my brother, he goes, Hunter Thompson's favorite ski movie was that Maltese Flamingo that you and your brother made. Once I heard that, then I realized, that guy was not kidding. Hunter did want to meet me. So no, I never met him and I never interacted with him, but I was a huge fan. So it was really cool to have that with Maltese. And, we were sold out and there's a lot of people that knew that story.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I want you to buy all of your ski and snowboard gear from Peter Glen Ski and Sports. Why Peter Glen? Well, first and foremost, they're the little guy who's been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. They aren't trying to take over an industry by making a ton of branded products that compete with the brands they already sell. They're not trying to get you to stay at a hotel or sell you a vacation. Peter Glen is about making sure you purchase the right products to ensure that you're going to have the most fun on the hill. And they have all the brands, all the products, and incredible deals both in-store and online. While other retailers focus on algorithms and AI, Peter Glen is all about having the most knowledgeable staff that understands what you need. And if you've been following them on Instagram, they've been dropping some incredible pro tips that will make your time on the hill more enjoyable. At the end of the day, people have trusted Peter Glen since 1958 because of their proven track record and all-around passion for snow and beyond. So if you ski, snowboard, inline skate, wakeboard, water ski, or need outerwear for your adventure, Peter Glen Ski and Sports is your one-stop shop, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a hassle-free return policy, and they price-match reputable dealers. So please support this podcast and buy your stuff over at peterglen.com. Next up, it's Elan Skis. I started telling you about Elan building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading up to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elans. There's a reason for that. People who ski Elans notice that skiing on award-winning products made in what is considered the best factory in the world will make them a better skier. The product they put into the marketplace is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, and they don't cut corners on materials or production. The difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to everything else on the wall. You'll see a difference in the fit and finish, but the most important difference is how they'll perform on snow. That's why Elan's been winning a ton of awards at the magazine tests, because they really do ski better. If you want to have more fun on the mountain this season, get on an Elan. You can find out about all things Elan over at elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and if you haven't been hearing a lot about Stanley lately, you must be living under a rock. They've absolutely blown up in 2023, and everyone is talking about them. I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else's for about 7 years now. I mean, they invented the category in 1913, and while they always have done well, the world now knows that if you don't have a Stanley, you don't have the best. And I love having the best. Personally, I use Stanley pint glasses every single day, and I swear by them. And my wife and so many others can't live without their Stanley quenchers. And recently, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine. Instead of buying $20 burgers, we bring our food to the mountain and it stays piping hot in our Stanleys. And I end up saving about $70 a weekend not buying food. While that's rad, what's even radder is that Stanley offers Powell Movement listeners their biggest discount that they make available to the public. I'm going to save you 30% on all your Stanley products. Here's what you need to do to get that discount. Head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and at checkout, enter the code SNOW30. That's all caps and the number 30 with no spaces, and you'll save that 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Was that the movie where you covered the first snowboard worlds in Breckenridge?
Yes.
What was the vibe like at that thing? Because that was so new, and it was like all these snowboarders coming together, and it was like they had all found their tribe and a totally different crowd than the ski world. What was that like for you seeing it? Did it remind you of like the early freestyle days?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I liked snowboarding, because the snowboarders were ostracized. And at that point, Breckenridge was the only major ski area that allowed snowboarding. The rest of the country didn't. They were banned. It was illegal, right? And so that's a big part of the sequence. And the sequence is very prescient, because I say in the sequence, a lot of people came up to me and said, that's just so amazing that you said this in 1986. Because I said, eventually there's going to be rules and judges and committees and sanctions, and it's just going to be what it became, which is pretty mainstream organized. It's an Olympic event. But the sequence is so funny because like the half pipe, it looks like somebody's driveway.
Right.
It looks like somebody just shoveled their driveway on a slant. It's totally uneven. It's nothing like what the pipe dragons make today. And especially if you're at Aspen, the X Games just finished. The gap jumps and the half pipe here, they're just unbelievable compared to what that thing was in 1986. So, the movie got so many laughs because everything was antique. And that's the last thing I said before we started the movie. I go, just take yourself back in time, because 1986, there's no internet. There's no internet. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. There's no Facebook, Instagram, nothing. There's no podcast. There's no Powell Movement. The only way you could see a ski movie is to go down to the Wheeler Opera House or whatever auditorium in your hometown and go see the Warren Miller movie, unless you knew about this VHS cassette tape with this movie called Maltese Flamingo. That's really cool because we kind of went viral before viral with a VHS tape. It was really nice to be able to intro the movie in that context. And it got so many laughs. The Secret Life of Sleeping Bags, people were just on the floor because it is hilarious. It's stupid. And the whole reason I did that is North Face had given me a bunch of sleeping bags and tents and coats. And I'm like, how am I going to put sleeping bags in a ski movie? So Secret Life of Sleeping Bags is just this very grand product placement.
And, you were able to draw from all different walks of the world for that movie because you had skiers in it, you had snowboarders in it, but then Swatch hooks you up with skateboarders. There's like Tony Hawk, Christian Hosoi, Steve Caballero, Lance Mountain, like all names that still hold weight today. Did you end up in Lance Mountain's backyard and shooting at his house pretty much?
Yeah, that's where we shot, Lance's backyard and Hollywood Boulevard with Per Vilander. Just watching that footage, it just brings back memories because it was 5:00 in the morning on a Sunday at Mann's Chinese Theater, and Bruce is pulling me. I'm sitting on a skateboard with a wide-angle lens, and Bruce is pulling me down the Walk of Stars, and Per Vilander's doing all these amazing freestyle tricks. He was just stunning with what he could do on a skateboard. And that's the first time skateboarding had ever been in any ski movie. And same thing with the snowboarding. I think in Europe, apocalypse movies were just coming out. They did have, it was mostly mono skiing, but I think they did have some snowboarding, but nothing in North America. Warren had never had snowboarding in his movies, and certainly not skateboarding. So there was a lot of firsts in that movie, which is cool. And then the movie we're showing next Wednesday night, Groove Requiem in the Key of Ski, that's got incredible firsts. Seal's music. At one point, Seal told me, because I'd never had met him when I used the music in Groove Requiem, because I was working with Trevor Horn's record company, ZTT Records. I just kept getting these DAT tapes of, all the new acts and things. And I remember the first time I plugged in Seal's first album, acoustic version of Seal's first album, and I was just like, oh, this is going to be huge. It was. But Seal, years later when I did finally meet him, he goes, I think that Groove Requiem movie that you did, I think that broke me in North America. And I'm like, Henry, come on. You were going to break in North America anyway. And I just totally poo-pooed the thought. But, years later, I was thinking about it. I was talking to somebody the other night. It did break him in the affluent, predominantly white skier market.
Groove Requiem in the Key of Ski. We're talking about that now. It's like a time capsule of the early 90s. You had Dan Donnelly in there as well. He's a legendary Northwest snowboarder, and he rode with so much style. And while I would think that snowboarders wanted to stay far away from ski movies, were your films the exception because you included everyone?
Yeah, and part of that was because K2 had him sponsored. But I've been into snowboarding since the Maltese Flamingo, since I saw it at the World Snowboarding Championships. I met Craig Kelly there, and we actually shot a Wrigley's commercial during Maltese. But I don't know, I just thought Dan and Scott together would be great, and especially in Alaska. And again, then that's Seal's music. I don't think those Alaska sequences would be what they are without Seal's music. And it's a skier and snowboarder together. There was something about that was great. And that whole ending sequence of Groove Requiem, I did the edit in one night.
Oh, wow.
I was on acid. It's true. And I don't think I've done it since, but when I finally watched the sequence that I had done, I'm like, oh my God, this is fabulous.
While I'm talking about snowboarders, because we talked about Dan Donnelly a little bit and him and Scott going up to AK, but in Siberia, you worked with Craig Kelly. And while we're not going to talk about that movie, that guy is such a legend that I have to ask you, what was he like?
Craig? The thing with Craig is he studied in university, physicist, right? So he's a very intelligent guy, and he was always reading. And that's why, his innovations for Jake Burton in snowboard design, a lot of the stuff he invented is, still relevant today. So Craig was a really, really smart guy. He was very quiet. He was a lot like Schmidt, whereas, he didn't say something important to say. Whereas me, I'm just talking all the time, right? And half the shit that comes out of my mouth is just that. Right? But I guess I admired both of them, Craig and Scott, because they were quiet and intelligent and incredible athletes. Their actions spoke for them. And I admire that because that's a quality I don't have.
While we're talking about legends, in Groove, you also have Laird Hamilton. That's kind of earlier Laird, and what was he like to work with?
Well, I didn't shoot that sequence. My friend Robert Masters, who, if there was a windsurfing Hall of Fame, he'd be in it. Because Robert, he was just way ahead of his time. He was a British guy, again, super intelligent, but he was into video and video editing, way ahead of the curve. And so one of the things about that Laird sequence is Robert shot that from a helicopter. It's broadcast video. And the thing about that sequence with Laird is that Laird's riding a speedboard. And those speedboards are designed to go straight on flat water, like Speed Beach on Maui in Malaya. That's what those boards were designed for. Or Lake Garda, Italy, going straight. So Laird is on a speedboard in the surf off Sprecklesville on Maui. And no one can do that. No one can ride a speedboard in the waves, but Laird could. I maintain that if it involves water, Laird Hamilton can do it. He's just that gifted. But so I never met him. I'd been around him because I was a Maui windsurfer and I'd seen him. But, I'd seen him like, you see Franz Klammer or something. Oh, that's Franz Klammer.
Yep.
So I didn't know him. I knew who he was. I'd occasionally see him in a coffee shop or something. And I'd be, oh, wow, God, that's Laird Hamilton. But I didn't know him. And it's funny because I talked to him a couple of months ago because we were going to maybe get Laird Superfoods to be one of our sponsors. So I ended up through Rory Kennedy, who was Robert F. Kennedy's youngest child, who's a filmmaker. She made the movie about Laird, and she bought some footage from me because I forget the guy's name. Don King, I think, shot the waters footage of Laird, but I happened on it. So that's how I kind of hooked up with Rory Kennedy, and she's a really interesting character. Robert F. Kennedy's youngest. She was in the womb, Ethel Kennedy's womb, when her father was murdered, assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
Crazy.
I know. So she never met him. But anyway, so through that connection, she called Gabby Reese and said, hey, this Greg Stump guy's trying to get a hold of Laird. And Gabby said to Laird, do you know Greg Stump? And he's like, yeah, that windsurf sequence helped make my career wide open. He called me right back and we had a good laugh about that windsurf sequence because it's in video, broadcast video, but that video is within a movie that's all 16 millimeters film. So when it switches to video, it's stark and startling. The first time I showed that movie in Portland, Maine at the debut, you couldn't even hear Iggy Pop. You couldn't even hear the music because the people were cheering so loud watching that sequence because it is an impressive sequence. And then the last jump, he almost hits the helicopter.
Yeah. You talk about Iggy Pop, and I think you have the Beastie Boys in there too. Do you have to pay for that music back then, or is it through personal relationships, or how do you get that stuff?
Once the Seal stuff broke, well, it wasn't just Seal, it was my relationship with Trevor Horn and Jill Sinclair, his wife. Then it was easy to get to somebody like Iggy Pop, because I called Iggy's manager, and by that point I realized if you want to get artist approval, you have to make the sequence first, let them see it. And because inevitably, once they saw it, they were whatever. Iggy, I did have to pay like the minimum $2,500. But for anyone else, for any other movie, it would have been $50,000.
How much is the most you've ever paid for a song for anything you've ever done?
$2,500 for Iggy.
Oh, wow. So you've made out like a bandit, where other people nowadays are paying a lot of money for songs in ski movies, which is pretty crazy. In Groove, it's not really an overtly political movie by any means, but the first Gulf War was going on. How did that influence the film?
It was a huge influence because, here I was with a budget. So we're flying to Europe, we're flying all over to film. And, at that point, the planes are empty, because nobody dared to fly, especially to Europe, because, the planes were going to get blown out of the sky. And it was everywhere. And I was living in Canada at Whistler at that point, too. So I kind of lost a lot of my American, I don't want to call it sensibilities, but to me, the war was very wrong. And I wanted to use it as a timeline. But I also knew that if I was going to use this war as the timeline for the movie, I had to stay apolitical. And I had to walk right down the middle line and take no sides, even though I had a side in my mind. And sure, there's a slant that this war was awful. But Neil Young made a tour movie that year that used the war as a timeline. I've never seen it. I just heard about it. But it was a very risky thing, but I knew it was risky. And I think that also helps give it an edge. Because, there's no ski movie with a war as a timeline.
No, not at all. We're going to talk about your most famous movie now. It's The Blizzard of Aahhh. We talked about how it got its name. And you're an established filmmaker. I mean, this one is the one that really, really establishes you. But you've already made a bunch of movies before this. And I'm sure raising money gets easier and easier. How were you able to lure Scott away from a Warren Miller shoot to shoot with you? Because I would think that he would look at you as out there compared to like what Warren was at that point.
Well, money. I had, at that point, a pretty decent budget. And I said to Schmidt, you want to come live in Chamonix for a month, all expenses paid, and all you got to do is be in my stupid movie. And he was very skeptical because, he's not a bump skier at all. He's a downhill racer. And he just knew my previous movies, Maltese Flamingo, Good, the Rad, the Gnarly. I mean, that was as goofy as can be. And that's the movie before Blizzard. So he didn't come into Chamonix with any expectations other than skiing for free for the month and living there for free for the month. And then even after we were done shooting, he didn't think we had enough footage. Nobody thought we had enough footage.
One thing that was cool about that project to me was the athlete interviews, and it was kind of different than anything that had gone on before, but it really wasn't, because while I thought it was all Greg Stump creative genius, did that all come from a windsurfing thing that you saw?
Yeah, I saw a movie by a guy named Jonathan Weston called Impact Zone, and he had the athletes talking, and this is before MTV Sports, and the closest thing was like NFL Films, but even NFL Films, it was an announcer. It was a narrator / announcer. It wasn't the actual athletes talking, but Impact Zone had Fred Haywood and Mike Waltz and, all the star windsurfers at that point talking on camera in front of like a black backdrop. And I thought, wow, that's it. That's my next movie. I'm going to imitate that. That's how I got the athletes speaking. And then if you notice in License to Thrill, there's no narration. I don't narrate that movie because I was so embarrassed of my narration in Blizzard, because Blizzard got so big so quickly, and I'm 26. And suddenly I'm listening to my narration. And I'm talking like I know everything. This is extreme. I'm just speaking with this voice of authority that was, in my mind, invalid. And so I didn't narrate License to Thrill. I just let the athletes speak. But it turned out to be incredibly powerful because before that, no one had ever heard Scot Schmidt talk. Same thing with Blizzard. Nobody they'd seen Scot Schmidt in Warren Miller movies, but they'd never heard him speak before. And then once you heard him speak, he took on a whole nother level of kind of stardom, or it just made him seem more real, or it let you get to know him better, I guess.
Well, with Blizzard too, you say you don't like the narration, but it was almost like the bravado that you had of saying how these are the best in the world and this is extreme. It was almost like you ignored the history behind what really was extreme before the name extreme existed. And was there a backlash in Chamonix when that thing comes out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was, Glen was, because Glen never came home after Chamonix, after Blizzard, because he just chose not to, because he had a bench warrant and he was going to get arrested the second he stepped foot into the country. But he stayed there and he took the heat from the Chamonix, right? Because they were just like, who do you guys think you are? You're bullshit. So Glen was there in Cham because, there was a big backlash from, the guides in Chamonix and the real extreme skiers, your Valensants and the people that were really extreme skiing. Because, I basically just stole the word and the concept from the French.
You stole it and it became the marketing tool of everything in America, it seemed like.
You could get an extreme combo at Taco Bell, man.
For sure, for sure. And, the one thing that really helped change this movie, and it was a terrible thing, was Lynn Weiland breaks her back. That's a terrible thing that happens. She walks and skis and does everything nowadays. But back then, you thought she might be paralyzed. I heard you fainted at the hospital, or I think you told me that in our last podcast when we talked about your life and times. But is that something that you feel guilty about, or is that something that's just like you got to charge that to the game and that shit happens?
Lynn's injury was, horrifying and terrible because, it was my friend, and she wasn't my lover, but she was my friend, a really good friend. And she had that injury happen because I'd always been afraid of that. And as the other TGRs and MSPs started coming along, they had deaths. They had people die in front of their cameras. And I just was like, I'm not going to film friends getting killed. And that's eventually why I quit making skiing movies, because I'm just like, this is getting insane and I don't want to be a part of it because I don't want to see one of my friends get hurt. Because, just watching Lynn break her back was horrifying. And, the people I'm filming are my friends, and it just, I'm not going to do this anymore. And plus I was burned out on it and I didn't want to make ski movies anymore.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I can't tell you how much I love my gear from Outdoor Research. When I signed on with OR, I knew there wasn't an outerwear brand on the market that performs as well as what OR is developing. That's what happens when you test your gear in the absolutely terrible conditions that we can get here in the Pacific Northwest. Days in the mountains are always more fun when you're warm and dry, and I know my OR gear will always deliver that. I'll tell you, on cold days, I live in my cold front hoodie, which is hands down the warmest and most stylish puffy I've ever owned. And then when I get on snow, my snow crew jacket and pants are not only warm, but it's one of those fits where if you don't see me ski, I look like a pro. I'm so impressed with the style that OR has been bringing to the table lately. And off snow, they sent me some Feroci pants, which are now my daily drivers. Think stylish, lightweight, packable, do-anything pants with the right amount of zippered pockets and stretch to be the only pant that you'll ever need. I love them. And really, I've been loving OR products since I bought my first OR rain jacket in 2000. And I'm going to save you 25% on your OR gear. Here's what you need to do. Head on over to outdoorresearch.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code SNOW25 and you'll get the deal. That's all caps, no spaces, and the number 25. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing. If you haven't heard of Best Day, they are hands down the best tasting non-alcoholic beer on the market. I enjoy Best Day for so many reasons. The flavor is the most important. I swear by the hazy IPA, the Kolsch, and the Belgian White. They all taste just as good or better than their alcoholic cousins. And I'll tell you, while I haven't quit drinking, when I go to the bar, after 3 or 4 beers, I usually feel like it's time for me to head home, and everyone thinks I'm lame. But lately, I have a new routine. I'll have a Best Day every 3rd beer, and it makes my night last twice as long. And we all know lasting longer is better. If you want to have your best day or night ever, or just enjoy a few cold ones at Après, grab a Best Day, and you can forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. To see all the flavors and order some beer, head on over to bestday.com. And if you're flying Alaska, you can now get a Best Day Kolsch at 30,000 feet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. That's what gets Plake back into the scene, because she's out, Plake gets flown back in, and then the magic happens with the movie. And when you guys come back to the States, it sounds like Scott didn't think you had much in the can, but you knew you had gold on your hands. Is it true that you instructed one of your buddies that if I die, you need to edit it just like this?
David Farrer, my childhood best friend. He's a lawyer and a skier. And actually, he became a freestyle judge. He judged the Salt Lake City Olympics even. But Dave, I sat down with Dave and I mapped out on paper exactly how to edit this movie together if I die, or if Warren Miller has me hit by a bus.
Was there a rivalry between you and Warren Miller? Did you guys not like each other? Because you worked with him and he changed your name in one movie. because he was bummed that you're going to go make your own movies.
What happened was, initially I was Greg Stump from Gorham, Maine, freestyle champion. See, I did the Warren Miller movie on purpose. I heavily solicited them and basically bullshit my way into that Warren Miller movie for one reason, because I knew I was going to make a ski movie. I thought, well, this would be a good last gasp of self-promotion with Warren. And once I started making ski movies, the Warren Miller people saw right through what I had done, because I duped them. I tricked Warren Miller. And so once he realized that, then they went back and changed my name to Greg Stottlemyre, an avocado farmer from Yucca or something like that.
That's pretty funny. So Blizzard ends up blowing up. It becomes the biggest ski movie in the country. You're on the Today Show. All kinds of different things happen. Is it one of those things where you guys all get rich off of that movie?
No, I didn't. Well, because I was heavily bootlegged too. That was one of the things I did on Wednesday night. I showed all these bootleg copies of Maltese Flamingo from Japan, from Australia, from England, because I just got crazily bootlegged. Well, I guess I did make money, but everybody else, well, Glen and Scott in particular, they both got huge contracts with North Face, K2. I didn't know till a few years ago how much Glen was actually making from K2 a year. He was close to $500,000 a year in sponsorship money from that company.
That's crazy, because when I was at K2, I don't think he was close to that.
Really? Maybe this just... Well, no, Tim Petrick told me this, that eventually Glen was making that much money. And that's when Tim had to finally pull the plug, because that was the entire ad budget. Or this is what I was told. You worked at K2, so you probably know more.
Well, let's not think about money then. Is this where you get famous? Like with all the media that you do, when you go to Hollywood now, does the name Greg Stump carry some weight?
If you're a skier. But that's when I started doing, commercials and music videos in Hollywood, it was because of the ski movies. So I didn't work my way up as a director, which is traditionally you have to do all these other jobs before you ever get to dream of directing. But I just immediately started as a director, which was great.
So that launches your Hollywood career. You do Super Bowl commercials, you do all different kinds of shit. But maybe 25 years later or so is the last movie we're going to talk about, and that's Legend of Aahhh. And with that one, it's kind of like a history of ski movies with a focus on what you've done. And you consider this your best movie. Why is that?
Well, it's the one I'm really comfortable with the narration, for one thing, because all the other movies, I don't like my narration. It's just not real. Whereas in Legend, I think I get it right. And to this day, I can watch that movie and not cringe. I also was working with Bob Nunn, who was the executive producer, so I had a decent budget. And for a ski movie, it was an exceptional budget. So there was really no excuse not to have it really tight and well-produced. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. It's pretty clean.
This one takes an eternity to produce and edit. For ski movies especially, most people put out a movie every year. You obviously took a long time off and then come back to making the ski movie. But it takes 3 years for you to produce and edit it. Why?
I just did multiple edits, and I kept showing it and testing it and seeing what sequences worked and what didn't work. And then, also what I felt didn't work or work. So, I had the time and the money to test it. And really, there was no excuse for that movie not to be good. I had all the resources. I had everything you could hope for.
It's getting the band back together. And what's it like? What's your relationship with all of those guys today? Do they kind of look to you and give you a lot of credit for helping build their careers? Mike
does. Mike definitely does. And I think Glen does too. But, the thing with Glen and I is, it's sort of a Lennon-McCartney thing. It's not in any way that big. But, I thought I was totally responsible for our success, and he thought he was. And the fact is that we both were. It was symbiotic, and it couldn't have happened without each other. And I think we're at that place now. But I don't really hang out with Glen. Whereas with Mike, he showed up here Wednesday night, and it was like old home days. And he looks so good in Maltese Flamingo. He skis so well. And Mike's just I've never even seen the guy frown. I don't even think I've seen him frown. He's just a happy person and very positive and kind.
And then what's your relationship with Schmidt these days?
Oh, that's great. Scott's the one I stayed the closest with. Once he got up to the Yellowstone Club, my friend Casey and I went up there a couple times, and Scott totally gives me props because he says without Blizzard of Aahhh, he wouldn't be at the Yellowstone Club, and he wouldn't be in the position he is at North Face.
He did so many movies with Warren Miller, and all of them don't mean half as much as Blizzard.
No, they don't, and because he talks in Blizzard and he speaks, and I think he becomes, human and accessible and relatable.
he does become relatable, and we could go on and talk about a bunch of your different movies, but I'm not going to do that. We're here to talk about 4 movies that are showing on Radical Wednesdays in Aspen. There are 3 more weeks of it, so if you're in Aspen or nearby, I highly recommend going and checking it out. But that's the body of our podcast. And at this point, it's time for Inappropriate Questions. And you know the drill. I get someone to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything.
Oh, dear.
And I was able to get a dude that you saw the other night at your first Radical Wednesday, a guy we've talked about a bunch, a star in a lot of your movies, a pro skier, mountaineer, certified mountain guide, and friend, Mike Hattrup. He comes up with 2 questions, but I'm going to ask the first inappropriate question, and here I go. So a couple years ago, you played Blizzard to a crowd here in Seattle. I showed up for it. I was excited to buy some Greg Stump posters and have you sign them. And I'm at the movie premiere, and I know pretty much everyone there, so we're all mingling. And everybody's like, "Where's Stump? Where's Stump?" Well, you were going to show up, talk, sell everyone movie posters, do all that stuff. But where the hell were you? Because you came late to your own premiere, you forgot the merch that you were supposed to sell, and while the night was still amazing, what happened?
Well, Casey and I had been partying, and we were staying in like a some really nice hotel in Seattle, and we overslept. And finally, we're like, shit, we're supposed to be at the theater, and we don't have time to grab the posters. We don't have time to do anything except get in a cab. Because I did show up, but I got there late because we'd been doing what we do best, having a blast. And so, yeah, that was not the right thing for me to have done.
But then you said to me that you were the only sober person at your premiere the other night. So did you learn a lesson from that one? Like, hey, I'm going to actually show up at this one and be there?
Well, yeah. I mean, plus I've calmed down and you can't be doing a residency in Aspen and be screwed. It's just, I was not going to let these people down, my sponsors, myself, there's just no way. But it was pretty interesting because half the people were dosed on mushrooms and just talking gibberish at me. And I'm, again, completely stone cold sober because, we just had so much to do that day. Sound check and picture check and check, everything. There was no room for screwing around. And that's the same thing with every Wednesday here. There's just no room for error because I want to do this again here. This is like performing at the Super Bowl. Performing in downtown Aspen during the month of February is, a career highlight for me. And, there's just no way I'm going to screw it up.
All right, so that is question number 1 from me. Here comes question number 2 from Hattrup.
Okay, Stumpy, I got only 2 inappropriate questions for you. The first one, having just watched Maltese Flamingo for the first time in decades, I believe, I understand why it was Hunter S. Thompson's favorite movie. And my question is, to come up with some of the wacko stuff in that, were you truly channeling your inner Hunter S. Thompson? And what kind of recreational drug cocktail and in which order do you need to consume those in order to come up with stuff like you came up with for that movie?
Well, there weren't any. Again, at that point, I was, a teetotaler. Well, not a teetotaler, but drugs or alcohol were not involved in the creativity in Maltese, I think, probably because since I didn't know how to make a ski movie, but I did know how to, because I worked in radio, I did know how to make kind of funny commercials and things like that. So I just applied the silliness. Plus, the skits in Maltese were co-written by a guy named Michael Raskin, who was a theater professor at the university with my dad. He's the voice in Secret Life of Sleeping Bags. I had the concept, but it was really Michael Raskin turning it into a German guy, like Nacht, camping, sleeping bags. Seemingly harmless concept, unless your sleeping bag has a secret life. And again, that's just product placement. How am I going to promote North Face sleeping bags in this movie? But that was the answer, So a lot of this, is product placement.
All right, we're going to go with your final inappropriate question, and I will cue it up right here.
In the after party, which was held at a gallery in Aspen, there was a remake of Hunter S. Thompson's Kitchen, complete with the booze and the typewriter and the gun and all the newspaper articles stuck on the refrigerator and the cupboards and bumper stickers, my favorite of which was "Impeach Nixon. He bugs me." So the next question is, what was it like being in that kitchen? Did it feel like you were actually partying in Hunter S. Thompson's kitchen?
Mike was under the belief that you had been in the kitchen, like I was under the belief earlier when we talked that you had met Hunter S. Thompson, but you'd never met the guy, you'd never been in his kitchen, so that was kind of your first real stepping into his world almost.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly was reading his when he was, the international affairs, whatever his title was at Rolling Stone. I mean, I loved his Rolling Stone work. I read Jan Wenner's autobiography this last summer, and pretty much just to get his perspective of working with Hunter, because without Hunter Thompson, there would have not been a Rolling Stone. It just wouldn't have been the same. And so, what was the question again? What was it like being in that kitchen? It's just great. I mean, because I just kept taking pictures of his Democratic National Convention credential card from 1972. And, I felt like I knew him by being in that kitchen. And I did know quite a few people here in Aspen that did know Hunter Thompson. In fact, one of the stories I told is John Oates from Hall & Oates. He used to live across the street from Hunter Thompson. And he told me he went there once because Hunter kept inviting him over and he was kind of scared to go. But he went there once and he said, Hunter Thompson pulls out a Bowie knife and puts it under John Oates' neck and makes him read poetry.
Bizarre. So that was round 1 of Inappropriate Questions, but that wasn't good enough. So I have another round for you. This one was recorded back in 2015, and it hasn't been online in years because it was an addition to a Powder podcast I used to have. But I needed to step up the Inappropriate Questions this round, and going back in time did it. So I time traveled back to 2015, where I got Elise Sogsted's husband, Cody Townsend's Inappropriate Questions for Greg Stump from a long time ago. Not only is Cody a super pro skier, but he's also wicked smart and really funny, and he crushed these inappropriate questions. So let's jump into question number 1.
The first is, Greg Stump had a lot of iconic movies and a lot of amazing sponsors, and that helped support him through it. But I wanted to see what was his biggest sponsor of his movie, the one he worked with the most. Was it acid or cocaine?
Well, nobody believes this, but I've never tried cocaine, not even once. And no one believes, but it's true. So cocaine, no. And I didn't try acid till I moved to Whistler.
Okay, so when you went to Canada is when it happened.
And I liked it. But no, I was very squeaky clean when I was making the movies, really. My life didn't spiral out of control till I moved to Whistler. Yeah. Well, no, I not that it spiraled out of control, but no, I wasn't. My biggest sponsors, no, it was neither acid or cocaine. I did it, the only sequence the only piece of work, whether it's filming or editing, that I ever did while I was on acid was that great seal sequence from Groove Requiem with Crazy, because I had to get the movie done, and I stayed up all night and edited that whole ending, and I did take a tab of acid, so.
That's a great answer, because our next question is going to roll right into what you're talking about. And here comes question number 2 from Cody.
Question number 2 is that, he worked with a lot of musicians in his movies. And I just wanted to know, is Seal as ugly in person as he looks on TV?
I think he's a fairly attractive guy. When I first met him, he talked quite a bit about what a great snowboarder he was.
Okay.
And he, intermediate, so he wasn't that great. And he was always kind of, not angry, but he'd say, well, you can snowboard better than me because you're on hard boots, or you're on soft boots. You should try hard boots. So I'd try hard boots, and I still was better than him. So I kind of frustrated him. And when one time at Whistler, early on, I just took him beyond his limits, and he tumbled down. Oh, it was brutal, right? And I had to hike him out, and we were in the avalanche area. I had to get him to walk down the edge of by the rocks and stuff, and he just was so pissed at me. And we get to the Creekside Gondola, and we're downloading, and he's just steaming mad at me. He's so friggin' mad at me. And I said to him, I go, Henry, you did really well up there. He goes, well, that's your idea of reverse psychology. It's not working. Right? So we get in the gondola to download, right? And so it's me, Seal, and his buddy, and his buddy thinks that Seal's going to punch me out. And then these 2 little girls get in the gondola at the very last minute. So Seal's just steaming mad at me. And these 2 little girls, one of them goes, Mister, what's wrong with your face?
Oh.
And I was like, oh, fuck. It's just going to go from worse to just horrendously bad. And he gave the girl an honest answer. And it wasn't tribal markings. I probably shouldn't say what it was, but it was a skin disease. But
I think part of his question was, and what was wrong with his face? So if you could say, it would be great.
I don't know that I should, actually.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. It's just a,
No, it's a personal thing. I just figured I'd try to push you on it.
Well, he told the little girls the truth. And, of course, because I read that it was tribal markings or like, Zambian royalty but just a simple immune disorder.
Fair enough. All right, so Seal is an attractive
but
male.
I never thought of him as ugly. He's a very attractive guy. He's a good-looking guy, right?
Yeah, I just think Cody doesn't know what an attractive man looks like. You and I, we know what good-looking guys look like, and Seal is one of them. Well, I'm going to go to question number 3.
I remember watching a movie when I was pretty young, and I forget the exact name of the movie, one of his weird ones after Blizzard of Aahhh, when they're sliding around the desert on monoboards naked with their dicks tucked between their legs, and being young and just going, what is going on? So I wanted to know if he still tucks his dick between his legs when he monoboards naked.
So another solid question there.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. That's Glen Plake and Dave McCoy. Cody's asking about the movie Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove was a bit of a mess because it didn't snow that year. So I had 2 big problems. One was that Glenn had signed with Reichly Tyrolia, and we were sponsored by Solomon. So that was my first problem. And then the second problem is it didn't snow. There was no snow in Europe. The only place we got any footage for that thing was at Mammoth. So it was basically I was screwed. Here I was, Blizzard of Aahhh, License to Thrill, Dr. Strangelove, and we got no snow, and I can't show my star's feet, Glen Plake, because he's on the wrong product. So I had some challenges in making that movie, and that's why it's so weird. Like everybody thinks I'm just nuts, but I didn't have it. I didn't have any footage, ski footage. So we just had to keep coming up with bizarre stuff. So the mono thing, and Solomon at the time had just come out with their monocoque skis.
Yep.
The mono. So we thought, well, this will be funny. We'll make a play on the monocoque.
Okay.
And we'll go monoboarding, and these guys are naked and they don't have cocks. Yeah, but it was Glenn that did the taping thing, and that was his idea to tape his cock up his ass, right, and use duct tape. Right, and so that was his whole thing. So he thought that would be hilarious, and it was pretty funny. But for a lot of people, it was rather disturbing.
The most disturbing part of that could have been taking the duct tape off.
I was not participating in that, Michael. But yeah, I'm sorry, Cody, that you got so disturbed by that. But I got a lot of trouble for that, I got to tell you.
That's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And this is a different episode, a promotional one. I usually don't do these, but you've had such an impact on the sport. And if I was going to do this for anyone, it was going to be for you. Plus, we've gotten to know each other over the years. And while I think you're crazy, I love you at the same time. I want to thank you for all you've done for skiing and beyond. And thank you for your time.
Well, and Mike, congratulations on being, the number 1 podcast in the ski industry. And I say that because my best friend is Jackson Hogan, one of your competitors. But even Jackson will admit, it's the Powell movement. So thank you, Mike. Thank you.
So that was time with Greg Stump, and this is a last-minute podcast. And when I say last minute, I recorded this on a Friday, and I'm putting it out on a Monday. And I only put this one together to help out a legendary friend. I highly encourage you to check out Stumpy's full episode to hear about his life and times after you listen to this one, as they truly are amazing. Now I want to thank you for listening and ask you to support the incredible brands that make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, and Elon Skis. Have a great week, everyone.